we go. Cool. Does this seem like just about everybody that we're waiting for? Cool. Cool, cool. Y'all are so far away. I need like maybe one table. I pick you guys because you're closer. Sorry. You're gonna be like my Calgary liaison. Can you do that? Oh, they're closer now too. Maybe you can foist it to them. I just need someone to like help keep an eye on the Calgary channel for me. In case I like miss questions and stuff. Or like I get the wrong screen or something like that. So, Firefox. Cool. Interesting. I think our camera's frozen at like last night. Just anyone in Calgary listening, can you tell me what you see on the screen right now? So do y'all see me, or do you see like a frozen still with a bunch of busy people in the middle of the night? So you guys can't see what I'm seeing over here, but like our camera's messed up, so I want to get that sorted out before we get started. We're calling big guns. Everybody just hang tight a few minutes. All right, how's that? I can see me now. I just want to make sure that Calgary can see me. I think that's it. Thanks. Nice. I'm going to switch to this whiteboard view. When we move over to the computer, if I forget to change the Calgary stream, someone please remind me. Because they can see the whiteboard right now, they can't see the screen. So when I start doing stuff over here, I need to remember to switch back, so if I forget, someone please let me know. Okay, cool. So who knows what we're talking about today? CRUD. What's CRUD mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, create, read, update, delete. There are 4 things that a web app can do, and those are them. That's the only thing that's like your whole job is like creating stuff, reading stuff, updating, deleting stuff. So is that a term that you know because you like just read it on the lecture title? Okay. Okay. So we're gonna talk a lot about what it means to like build an API, build a web server that provides methods for doing all those things, provides endpoints for doing all those things. And the place I want to start with is routes. So y'all know a little bit about routes. You did a little bit of that yesterday with Express, and I think with like your other HTTP server earlier on. Who can tell me what a route is? Let's start here. Who can tell me what a URL is? It's actually kind of a harder question in a way. Who can give me an example of a URL? Google.ca, great. Thank you, one person eventually. And we might see that. So there's a host here, and there's a path here. Google.ca is the host, / is the path, right? If we go to a site like Wikipedia or something, we get kind of more complex paths, right? So it might look like something like something like that. So we have our host name, and then a path to some resource. Now what do we get when we go to this resource? Like what can we expect this path to point to? A page containing all the information about soccer, yeah. Yeah, so kind of the way that we're used to thinking about routing in a web app is it's like the address of a page. Like I type in the URL I want, and then I get the page that lives there, right? It's like I'm just looking up a page. And that's certainly the way Wikipedia works. It's the way a lot of sites work. But we're going to start thinking about these endpoints, these paths, as not pointing to pages, but pointing to instructions about what you want the app to do. So in a very content-heavy app that uses some kind of routing scheme like this, the thing that's usually going on is you're just pointing to a page. It's almost like you're traversing like a file tree, right? And if you're just using like static HTML and you're like navigating through like folders, maybe you did some of that like prior to Lighthouse Labs, then that's exactly what's going on. You're just like you can treat these exactly like file paths, and then you get the file that lives here. And we used to have like our pages used to have like .html at the end, and we still have question. Really? Yeah, it's just horrible. Let me try another color. How's that? Still pretty disastrous. I'm gonna try one more color. I think that marker's streaky and awful. All right. We didn't miss much, Calgary. I'm gonna stop using the board, I guess. And we'll switch to Adam. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we just had like google.ca. Let's make that nice and big for everybody. Can everybody like way in the back? Okay, cool. Cool. So we had google.ca, we had like wiki.org/wiki/soccer. And then I just said that, you know, back in the day you would go .htmls. And like this would literally be, this server's job would just be to traverse like a directory structure and serve you up this file, right? And we still kind of see this with like images sometimes. But in general, routes normally look like this these days, and we don't say this is an HTML file, this is a text file as much, right? We say, we just say like this is just a description of where I want you to go, and what I get I assume is going to be HTML, but I don't really know. So the main shift that I want to make sure that we come out of this lecture with is that I don't want to think of these routes as taking you to a page. I want to think of them as giving an instruction to a server. It's like a method call. Does that make sense? It's like in the same way that you might have an object, you know, when you go math.random. This kind of parallels like math.com/random. I don't think that's a real thing. But the idea is here we're taking like this math object, whatever it is, and we're saying I want you to, you have a process called random. I want you to do that process, right? It's the same kind of idea here. And we map those things to CRUD actions. This is the last time I'm going to use CRUD because I think that's a gross word. I'm going to use bread instead. Also, bread kind of lends itself better to the idea of RESTful routing, which you're going to learn about in a bit. So like thinking in terms of bread, I think helps you organize your thinking about web resources a little better. So just kind of grooming the ground for that. So if CRUD is create, read, date, delete, and I tell you that bread is like the same thing but sounds nicer, what do BREAD stand for? Any guesses? The B is the hard one. What's R? R is the easy one. Read, yeah. I never noticed that before. If you take like, you see that? What's E gonna be? Edit, good job. A, add, very good. And D is gonna be delete. So what's B gonna be? Bring? Any other guesses? Okay, I'll try to walk you into it. Reading applies to looking at like one resource. So you're like looking in like the file system analogy, you're looking at a file. You're looking at an image, you're looking at a song, right? What's that? Browse, yeah. But if you want to look at an album or a playlist or a contact list as opposed to a song or, what did I say? Photo album or contacts. I think I got that right. Then what you're doing is browsing. You're looking at a whole collection as opposed to looking at an individual thing. So these are both, like you in the CRUD model, you could think of these both as read. But we often want to make the distinction between like browsing a collection and looking at an individual resource. So is resource a new word to anybody? Is it a new word in this context to anybody? Okay, so I'll explain to you, and everybody else can just like, you know, work on your project or whatever. So when we talk about a resource, we're talking about something very abstract. Okay, like the whole idea of doing your routing this way is so that whatever the server happens to do, from the outside, it looks very abstract. So like I don't know if Wikipedia stores this soccer page as like a file or a row in a database, or like someone who just knows a lot and types really fast. And I don't care. I just want to have a plan for asking for a particular resource. I know that this is a sort of thing that you can serve, and this is a specific thing that you can serve. And so I want to be able to ask for that and not really care how I get it. So resource is just like an abstract way of thinking about like usually a data entity or like some other some other data or behavior that we can get out of the server. Our routing usually deals with resources. When we talk about RESTful routing, that really buys into this idea of like resourceful routing. But in general, that's a good pattern to follow. There's nothing wrong at all with having like mywebsite.com/ make a new user. You can just like give that sort of route name, and you can just like make everything on your whole site like that looks pretty reasonable, right? Doesn't point to a resource, right? But we don't really want to think of it that way. We want to think of this, I mean, if you buy into this routing plan, the way that we want to think about it is we have user resource, and we're going to call methods on it. Like the same way that you might have like, in JavaScript, you might call methods like .user, and then .user has methods on it like create, right? It's like a little more predictable. It's like a little bit more, it makes a little more sense than just having like, you know, one object with just a whole bunch of functions that aren't really organized in any way. That looks sort of reasonable too, but in a very complex app where you have a lot of very different things going on, that can get pretty confusing. So our routing plan is mostly about consistency. Oh, you want to keep that around? All right. Yeah. Okay. We'll make this like an append only thing then. Okay. So I want to brainstorm some routes a little bit. Let's think of a resource and come up with a routing scheme for it. So that we get, when we're building up a routing scheme, we want to be able to do like everything that you're allowed to do to a resource in that routing scheme, right? How many things are you allowed to do to a resource? 5, yeah, 4, 4.5, yeah. You can browse a resource, you can look at a specific resource, you can edit a resource, you can add something to it, or you can delete, right? So if we have some sort of resource, we should be able to like have our routing plan kind of just fall out of, fall into like a familiar pattern, just by knowing what the resource is called. So let's say we have a resource called photos. We should be able to browse photos, should be able to look at a particular photo, change something about a photo, metadata, add annotations, I don't know, captions. We should be able to add a new photo, or we should be able to delete a photo. So let's say we have like photoapp.com. How do we browse our collection of photos? Gallery? Gallery makes sense, yeah. So that's a totally reasonable thing to do. Doesn't use the resource name. So it's sort of hard to guess that gallery was the thing that we wanted. If you make a big distinction between like a gallery is its own data entity, and you want that, you can create galleries, update galleries, read galleries. That's a reasonable thing to do. Let's just say it's like all the photos. How about just photos? Right, let's keep it simple. If we go search, and it's like, well, this is photoapp.com, so it's probably pretty self-explanatory. But if this is like bunch of things app.com and I go search, then we lose track of that it's photos, right? So to look at all the photos, we just go /photos. Not bad. Now we want to look at a particular photo. How are we going to do that? Photo/ID. Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be some ID, right? And the ID is like usually a number, but not always. In a lot of like production apps, you'll have some sort of like cryptographic hash. You might have like a meaningful name. You might just like give it like sort of like a file name or something. But often what you see is like photos/23. That just means in the database, there's like a row with the ID 23. You just go grab that one. And the advantage of doing it that way is you can guarantee that your IDs are unique. And so if you go, you give it a name like that. If this is going to be like a big app, you can't necessarily guarantee uniqueness on your photo titles. Or if you do, you might set yourself up for other problems, right? So we don't want to use titles. We want to use something that we're like the purpose of this data is to be unique, and we make that our ID. So 23, for example. A second ago, I did this thing. Y'all learn about that yet? Cool. So what does this do? Yeah, you can use whatever whatever this turns out to be in the URL becomes a variable that you can access from inside of your Express server. Pardon me? Yeah, it's a route. And this is a dynamic route in that you can change this, so whether it's 23 or like fish or whatever, you're going to get that as a variable in your route handler in Express. And we'll go into that more a little later. So I'm going to keep these grouped together. So that's how we're gonna read a photo, look at an individual photo. What do we want to do when we want to edit a photo? ID, then edit. That's a really good idea. And there's a better idea that we're actually going to use, but I haven't taught you that yet. So good job. So this is the best plan we know of right now for editing a photo, right? And it's good to know that, like, despite what we're going to learn a little later about HTTP methods and stuff and how we use those for doing edits, you can just like make up whatever route you want. So if the model that you're using doesn't fit the thing you want to do, you can just do something. You can just like come up with your own method. Just like you can name a function whatever you want in JavaScript and attach it to any object you want. You can also just break the rules of routing just whenever you want. And it's really easy and can be fun. How about when we want to add something? So what does add correspond to here? New something? Yeah. Say I'm taking a photo. I want to upload it and make it available to people using this app, whether that's me privately or whether that's everybody. What would be a reasonable way to make a route to add something? Not just something, right? Like a photo. Like that? What was the question? Oh, like you could upload a photo from the homepage, or you could upload one from a gallery. Uh, yeah, plausibly. But the route, the route doesn't necessarily have to be like nested like on the homepage. Like it doesn't have to. Like this is the path to home, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that like this is the path to home, so we go /upload. Like you can make a route point to anywhere you want, regardless of where the client is right now. So upload's reasonable, but we're missing our resource. So what are we uploading here? Photos, yeah. So photos /upload. And then finally delete. We want to delete a resource. We want to delete a photo. Photo /ID /delete. Yeah. That's pretty reasonable, and like basically we covered REST. That's most of what REST is. And there's like a little more to it, but like really not that much. A lot of people get hung up on, they think of like REST as like this like big thing they have to learn. Like this is basically it. You have like you have resources, and resources have collections, which is like the collection of photos. They have entries, which are like a particular photo, and you can do bread stuff to them. That's basically REST. But we have a problem. And the problem is this route and this route. Does anyone see it? Inconsistent how? If you were to have an idea what append like that, maybe. Yeah, you could have an idea that starts with upload. Yeah. So we're kind of seeing the problem, right? Is that like, if the idea here is I'm gonna have like photos /ID, and whatever comes after the slash, that's my variable that I'm gonna like go look something up in the database or whatever. This word upload comes after the slash, doesn't it? So now in my route handler, it's gonna see photos /whatever, and be like, oh, this is an ID. I need to take that and go look that up in the database, right? And so we have to write a bunch of code to work around that. Maybe it's a fairly succinct regular expression. Maybe we're scared of regular expressions and we don't want to like use them if we don't have to. By the way, now you need like this special case code to make your routing plan work, and that's no good, right? So we want to be able to we want to introduce like another system to describe like whether the thing that I'm doing is I want to read information or I want to change information. That's where HTTP methods come in. Any questions so far? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and make a new Express app from scratch. Fingers crossed this generator just works, otherwise I have to do it the hard way. Cool. You all seen that before? Okay, so I have Express installed globally, which means that I have this like Express keyword available. So I just make a new directory, I type in Express, hit enter, and it generates all this stuff for me. And then basically I'm ready to run it right away. I have to npm. Actually, I'm not going to use npm because I don't know if it works because I don't use npm anymore. I'm going to yarn. So I haven't been exposed to yarn yet. Yarn's like an alternative package manager to npm. So instead of npm install, you just go yarn. Instead of npm run start or whatever, you just go yarn start. It's like the same thing. I should be able to open this up, and then here's my Express file tree. I think I can go yarn start. It looks like it's running. This runs on what port does this run on? Oh, there it is. 3000 probably. Cool. I have this weird problem. I don't know why this happens, but I'll start up a web server, and then it'll just hang. Do you see it hang when I tried to go to it the first time? It'll hang until like a request is come and gone. So I have to go into my terminal and I use curl localhost 3000, and then like it works in my browser. I don't know why that happens. It only happens in Firefox. That's just a weird fact about my life. Okay. So let's see what's in here. This is basically my server.js. This has a bunch of junk in it. I kind of wanted to like do this from scratch and just like not have like anything in it. But we brought in a lot of stuff. We brought in like a bunch of middleware, body parser, blah blah blah. And then we have this router thing. I feel like this is too much stuff. Let's see how much of it we can delete. If you know much about me, if you've like worked with me, you know that I love to delete code. So I want to see how much of this we can delete and get away with. I don't want any of these routers. I'll do my own thing. Don't want that. Don't want that. Okay. It's a lot of code. Okay, so let's see if see if I can make a route work now. Why is this using var? I don't like this at all. Oh. Cool. Y'all see that? This important piece of data is like my hello world, right? So everybody knows what's going on here, right? Does anybody not know what's going on here? Does anybody definitely know what's going on here? I need to see like a few more thumbs up, or I'm just gonna explain like every line of there it is. Cool. Yes. Why what? Why did I have the port defined? Or why didn't I? Oh, because this boilerplate is it's deferring that part to like some other part of the app. I think maybe it's in this like bin directory or something. Yeah, so it defines the port in here, and I think what it does is, yeah, it imports the app and then like does all like the crunchy like make the server go thing. And then we have our listen there. Yeah, so we do define the port. We define it in this file. And if we want, we can pass it as an environment variable. So this is going to be like a default port. Otherwise, I can go, like when I start the server, I can go like port and go like that, and now it's running on 8080. I can also set up like a file that loads those variables in automatically, and that way, when I've deployed this code, if I want to make any changes to like what port it's running on or other things like that, I can just configure it with environment variables, and I don't have to touch the code. Okay. Any other questions about this stuff? Okay, so this is like bonehead simple, right? Is like what I'm saying here is for this app, when I receive a GET request to home, run this function, right? I have my request object, my response object. The response object always has to do something. If it doesn't, your request just hangs, right? Your server is responsible for fulfilling that like round trip. And yeah, that's like really simple. So it extends really straightforward to this with photos, right? Like we can just go like photos /ID, edit, upload, yeah, delete. And I think that's all our bread routes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and like defined our API, and that's a really good place to start when you're putting an app together. Is like, even if you don't write out the route handlers like this is very placeholder, right? But even if you don't write it out like this, a good place to start is figure out what your routes are. So you might already know what your database tables are. I mean, you guys don't because we haven't done databases yet. But you might already know some facts about your app. Like it's going to have photos and users and comments and stuff like that. And that's a good place to start. You start there, and then you put together like the routes. Okay, what sort of stuff do we want to be able to do to comments? You start writing out your routes. And then that turns into the interface that your web app interacts with the outside world with. Okay, so I want to switch gears here a little bit. And I want to look at a certain obscure site that sometimes I bring up for pedagogical reasons. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. This is a site that mostly I use to get cheap furniture when I need furniture. And I want to pay attention a little bit to the routing scheme, and I want to pay attention to what happens in the network tab. So I'm going to open this guy up. I'm going to go to the network tab. Who's visited the network tab? Good, good. So you know that what the network tab does is when HTTP request is made by the browser, it's recorded in the network tab, and then you can look at it. You can tell what the request was and what the response that you got from the server was. And it's a really useful way to see how your app is interacting with that interface that we define in terms of our routes. So let's see what Craigslist does. I often use Craigslist as an example because it's a pretty simple app, and it follows kind of these like classic resourceful patterns. Like if you use a more complex app, like we tried to do this with like Facebook or something. Facebook does all sorts of like asynchronous, like just rearranging things on the fly, single page app behavior that doesn't really lend itself that well to, like it's the same principles, but it's like harder to break down what's going on. Like it gets really complex and really entangled. Craigslist is nice because like every time you do something, there's a page refresh. It's like it goes back to the server and it's like, what should the page look like now? And Craigslist like builds a page for you and then like sends it back. Very classic, very, very useful for learning. So we see a whole bunch of requests when I load the page. I'm gonna make this a whole separate window so that I can zoom way in. We have a status code. What's a status code? Yeah, so the status code tells us like kind of how it went. Seeing 200 all the way down means things went great, right? The 200s are all okay, are all great. The 300s are like all probably fine. I didn't get you anything, but I gave you instructions about what to do instead. The 400s are you messed up. The 500s are I messed up. I'm the server in that example. Over here we have the method. That's the secret sauce I haven't told you about yet. This is the domain, so the host, right? And then this is the path. It says file for some reason. I think that's a bad label because it's not necessarily a file, but this is the path. And you can see like in Craigslist case, you have like a JavaScript file, you have an HTML file, CSS file. It's all pretty standard except for this one, and this one represents the actual route that I went to, right? No params, and the response is a web page. An ugly web page. Why is it ugly? Yeah, this is like outside of the context of any CSS, right? Because when you put that link tag in your HTML, what you're saying is when this loads in the browser, and this is not a browser context, right? This is just like an HTML viewer. When this loads in the browser, make another request to go get the CSS and load that too. And that did happen. It happened on like this very next line. That's CSS, I assure you. But this thing doesn't have access to it. So the response can be like text. It can be a file. It can be a couple other things, but like mostly what we're responding with is like just text, right? The CSS file, just text. This HTML file renders it as HTML, but it's just text. So let's look at some classifieds. What do you guys want to look at? Motorcycles? I can look at some motorcycles. Cool, so here's some motorcycles. Gonna clear my thing and refresh the page. So we get a bunch of motorcycles, right? What bread action did we just take? Yeah, browse. Yeah, exactly. We said you have some, I don't know what D stands for in this context, but you have like some category called motorcycles and scooters. There's your search keyword. And then I think MCA, I think Craigslist has all these codes for like each category. And MCA is probably like motorcycles and accessories or something. So this is a description of what I wanted to look at. And this isn't a page that somebody like handcrafted and just put here, right? This is dynamically generated. So I have to cough. I don't want to calorie zero. Sorry, guys. So I don't want you to think like I want to load the search page. I want you to think I want to make a request to view all the classifieds. And the Craigslist web server is going to go to work building up a page for us, right? And that's important because each of these are each of these carts are generated from database data, right? It wasn't like a Craigslist developer that built these. It was a user submitted some data, and then some code knew how to build this card out of that data, right? And so the thing that we're going to learn about is how submitting that data works, and how reading it back also works. So I guess they're taking a break. Maybe that means we should take a break. Then we're going to talk about forms and stuff. Sound good? Okay, we're just getting ready to come back. Just waiting for some feedback from Calgary that they're also ready. And then we'll get started again. I see Sam Rush typing. Okay, cool. Can they hear me? They can? Okay, great. So we're going to talk about complex interactions with web apps such as Craigslist. So Craigslist is a pretty simple app. Before long, you're going to know more or less how to build an app that does what Craigslist does, for the most part. But it has a bunch of like kind of complex interactions, right? Like you can do things like filter by distance. You can do things like filter by like just things that are posted today. All sorts of stuff like that. Here are some of them. Now, how does that fit into our routing scheme? Well, one option is we could like put all of those things into our routes, right? Like we could go post slash. Actually, what do? They do. So when you're searching for motorcycles, it's like /search/MCA. So we could go like /search/MCA/ posted today, and like now that's a variable, right? That appears in our params. And we could go, I don't know, max distance, min distance. And we could string together parameters like this. What else do we have? Has image, right? And then we could end up with routes that are like search, MCA, true, 25, true. And you could end up with routes like this, right? What's up? Oh, so could you, like if you're looking at the Craigslist route handler, could you have something like app.get search category or something like that? And then what you do here is you go and look up the category in some table. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you can use, one of the takeaways here that's kind of fun, is good to know even if you never use it, is that you can have many of these URL parameters. And yeah, you could absolutely do, you could absolutely parameterize this and then like go look up what's valid there somewhere else, right? And then inside of this, inside of here, you could do some like if rec params category is MCA, do like one thing, and then if it's like something else, do another thing, right? So you could totally do that. Yeah, that'd be no problem at all. But yeah, so we could also generate routes like this, right? Like every time you want to like change the parameters, you mess with this. But this is like kind of crazy. It's very error prone for a couple reasons. One reason is that the order of all of these matters, right? So like if you don't pass a posted today parameter and you don't get false, you end up with like it's not there. Then now you get 20 as a posted today, max distance is 5, min distance is true. Big mess, right? Same kind of problem you have if you have like a function that takes too many parameters, too many positional parameters. That's bad news, right? So pretty soon this kind of strategy gets unwieldy, even though you can do it, right? So a place where this does come up, where you do want to have like multiple parameters in a lot of cases, if we talk about our photo app, you can imagine that we have albums. Albums. And albums have an ID, right? And then you want to get all the photos in a particular album. And then you want to get a particular photo in a particular album. Photo ID. You could have like, album ID and photo ID. Right, that's kind of a practical place to use that. Or you have some piece of data, you can be like, I don't know, results for some like math thing you did, I don't know. And then you could go dot format. And so that means you could go results.html, results.csv, results.json. And you could set up your server to pretend like these are file extensions and then serve the appropriate thing. Oh, you didn't want me to delete that stuff, right? Okay, I'll leave it in there even though it's like kind of a disaster. So it turns out we're not going to do this. We need like a kind of more versatile plan. I want to be able to pass parameters in some other kind of way. So let's see what Craigslist actually does. I want you to notice this URL up here, search/MCA. And I'm going to go, I only want to look at motorcycles with images. What has changed? Yeah. Yeah, we have a question mark in there, and then yeah, we have a haspic equals 1, and that looks sort of like a variable assignment, or maybe like some sort of like key value format for me. Yeah. So 1 probably means true in this case, right? So we can imagine that if we put 0 in there, that means like we don't like we're setting that parameter to false, right? And you could absolutely just have the word true here, but you know, URLs have like a character limit. I think it's like, depending on the browser, I think like the recommendation is like 2048 characters, right? So if you have a whole bunch of these, you can save a bunch of characters by, you know, making these 1s and 0s instead of trues and falses. But yeah, so what's going on up here? Does anyone know what this part of the URL is called? Pardon? Endpoint? So endpoint means kind of like this part. So yeah, an API endpoint is sort of like a method that you can call. And you can pass a variety of parameters to that method. But endpoint generally means like if I structure URL like this, then this server knows how to respond to that. And then any permutations that you can do within that is like still considered like the same endpoint in most cases. So like if we go, you know, photo/ID, and ID is dynamic, then this is one endpoint, even though ID can be like all sorts of numbers. Yeah. So what we have? We had So this is called this is a parameter format. This format is called query string parameters. So we're making a query. The query is in the form of a string, and the meaning of the string is like a bunch of named parameters. Query string parameters. If you click on links in your email, oftentimes you'll see like this string of like, you'll have some like normal looking URL, then a question mark, then like a billion things. Most of which are like data about the particular email campaign that you're responding to, so that when the server receives that, it can write down like, oh, you came from this campaign and you're on this mailing list, and like, okay, that's interesting, that's good. And it records all that stuff and shows you the same content. So next time you're next time you notice that you have like this question mark and then like a bunch of stuff after, try just deleting everything before the question mark and see what changes. And sometimes the answer is nothing from your perspective. You can have more than one query string parameter. So if I check another one of these, let's say search titles only. That one didn't do anything. That one didn't automatically refresh. That's interesting. Posted today does. So I only want motorcycles that just went up. So now the format here has changed, right? Question mark still indicates that everything after here is query string parameters. It's a new format, right? And so we can't then go /photos/ We can't continue the URL after this, right? It's like the query string parameters are always something that we tack on the end. So we go question mark, and then first parameter ampersand. So that's kind of like a comma. Second parameter, and then we can go, you know, we can just string parameters together all day until we hit that character limit, basically. So how do you get query string parameters up there in the URL? The answer is twofold. One is you make a GET request. Two, you have form data. So we're going to learn a little bit about building forms. I'm going to go... So I only want bikes from 1974. There's just the one. Yeah, so in that case, I still have my previous parameters here, and I also got like a new one, query 1974. I just took this string and put it up in there. So this page is basically most of the UI for Craigslist is driven by forms, right? So where do we find forms on this page? Where are the forms on this page? The sidebar, yeah, these are all forms, right? Anywhere else? Yeah, the search bar. And there's one more place. It's up here. All these drop downs. This is a form too. So the thing that we use forms for, and this is one of those like key takeaways of this lecture. The thing that we use forms for is sending parameters back to the server. So when we have things that we definitely want to be parameterized, they go back to the server via our form. So we can structure the form to have a bunch of inputs. We name those inputs, and then when we submit the form, those go back to the server, and the server can read them, and then decide what, like, do whatever it wants with them. So I've gone ahead, and I'm going to do something like kind of crazy here. And if you find it really confusing, I'll just like bail out and do like the reasonable thing. But in my server code here, I just built a form like out of a string. So normally what you do is you go like res.render and then like some like view name, and it goes and like gets an HTML file or an EJS file and like, you know, builds up the EJS and like swaps out all the dynamic parts and comes back and sends it over as text. But I want to do it this way because A, it's easier for me right now, and B, I want to show you that the thing that you send back to the server is like, it's very dynamic. All we're doing is we're dealing in text, right? And by the time you send that response back to the client, it just gets turned into text and sent over. So if I send plain text here, when I go to my photos route, the only thing that I do in this route handler is res.send and then like some HTML. I'm not even like wrapping it properly. This is not a good plan. We can see I get my form here. I have like a input field and a button that says search. Like what it decided to autocomplete for me. And yes, this is just a form tag, input, form. So form tag with no attributes. The input tags do have some attributes. The type is important. I said type equals text in this context, but there are like a whole bunch of other input types that we can use, right? Radio buttons, checkboxes, text areas, color. Seen the color one before? Color is kind of cool. I'll show you the color one, since you asked. And then this name attribute is going to become important. So I'm going to go like, I'm just going to put some garbage in there to really like really highlight what's going to happen here. And then we have a submit input type. And submit is the thing that actually makes the form go. Right? So when you click submit, that's when you make the request. That's when all of the values in the input fields get turned into query string parameters or get turned into the other kind of parameters that we're going to talk about and sent over to the server. So let's see what happens. I hit refresh. Nothing changes. How come? Didn't restart my server. Very good. So you're going to use a tool that is supposed to do this like automatically for you, but I just like quit my server, yarn start again. It's going to be like npm run start for you. Now when I refresh, hey, there's my my color picker. So I have this text field. I guess we're searching for photos. So I'm going to search for photos of fish. And this isn't attached to like any data at all, so we're not going to see any search results or anything. We're just talking about like the mechanics of forms here. And I'm gonna, what color of fish do I want to select? So I get this color picker for free. This will vary by operating system. And I think for color it's by operating system, and then for other ones like date and stuff, it's like your browser decides what pops up. So you can make your own color picker out of JavaScript if you want. But it's kind of cool that you can just like get this for free. So I want to search for seafoam fish. That sounds appropriate. Gonna click search. Search is my submit element. And what are we gonna see happen here? Take it back to what happened with Craigslist. All three parameters with all of their contents passed up into the URL. Yeah, so we're going to get question mark and then some query string params. You said all three. Fish, color, and true. So it turns out that the submit button doesn't actually, like we can make it put something up there, but usually the submit button just like makes the form go. It's just the send button. It doesn't actually change the data that goes in. So see what happened to my what's it called? To my URL. Hey, look, a mess. Where'd that come from? So search equals fish. And this mess equals this mess. If I highlight this part, what do you think about? What is this part? That's a color, yeah. And so what's this thing? Yeah, that's one of these. But when you encode stuff into like when you encode stuff as a URL, this one I think the deal is that it only uses ASCII encoding, and so like a whole bunch of characters aren't supported in ASCII. There's no real good reason that it works this way other than just like it's always worked that way and everybody's too scared to change it. But yeah, like when you put something in a URL, it often gets substituted out for some sort of like character code. So what's going on here is like this is going to evaluate to a pound, and then this is just the color. So like what we get here is like a hex color. This is going to be pretty important. I see a lot of people kind of like just, you know, copy paste their code as they're going through their exercises, and then they don't actually realize what's going on here. But what determines what my parameters are called? Yeah, exactly. It's the it's going to be the name attribute on the element. So I'm going to call this color. It's a lot more reasonable. Refresh, and notice when I refresh, my query string params stay up there. That's kind of interesting. And the reason is that we're expecting the content that renders on this page to be dependent on what the query string params are. So we want to keep those there, right? So if I copy paste like a link from a Craigslist search that I'm interested in, and I send it over on Slack to you, I want you to see the same thing that I'm seeing. Right? So we put it up there and it stays up there across page refreshes and everything. The browser doesn't get rid of them. But it's not always the case. I'm going to go back to photos, restart my server. Fish and aqua. That's also an appropriate color for a fish. Yeah. So my query and assignment says color because I changed the name attribute to color. That's pretty cool. So we're finally getting around to talking about HTTP methods now. So the reason we get this query string parameter here is because what we're doing is a GET request. And we know that because if we look in the network tab, we do this search again. Fish. It's just going to be black this time. And we look in the network tab, our method says GET. And what does GET mean? Yeah, GET means read. When you see GET, think read. And it's just as important, it's maybe more important to talk about what GET doesn't do as it is to talk about what GET does do. So what GET doesn't do is ask for any changes to happen on the server. GET is saying, I'd like you to show me this information, but you don't have to do anything. I just want to see what's going on. I just want to have a look. Keep doing what you're doing, nothing should change, right? Now there are exceptions to, like that's not necessarily what happens. Like I might log the request, I might like increment a view counter or something like that. But the point is when I ask to, go to photos with like these search parameters, I'm not asking the server to change anything. I'm saying show me something, don't change anything. This should be a safe request. And that's why my URL parameters go up here, right? Imagine if this was a login form or something, right? And I get like username, can be fish, whatever, and then password, right? And I get this up in my URL bar. That goes into my history, right? I copy paste that into Slack or something, and like someone sees my password. That's a terrible idea, right? So we don't want that. We want a different method for when we want to make changes to the server. We want to send like sensitive information to the server. We want to say this is a different species of HTTP request. So we give it a different method. Does anyone know what the method I'm about to introduce is? Yeah. Yeah, it's post. How'd you know that? Okay. Yeah, exactly. So get is about like reading things, so it corresponds to your B and your R. And when you want to change something, we use post. And so the mechanics of post are a little different. You'll notice by default my form doesn't say anything about what method we're using, and it doesn't say about what path we're going to, right? So what we can infer from that is that by default it uses get. I said that like get. It uses get as the method, and the path that it goes to is like whatever the current path is. If we want to, like, let's say we want to change some data here, right? Like, I don't want to search for a fish. I want to add something called fish, right? So I'm going to change this form around a little bit. So I'm going to say name equals photo name, color equals color. Oh, you know what we should talk about first, though, is how to read those parameters. That seems important. Yikes. You know how to send them, you got to know how to read them. Okay. So when they're query string parameters, can you believe I almost forgot that? When they're query string parameters, they come in on the request, right? Express gives you access to the incoming request, and the response that you're building up, right? So that's the whole model of Express, right? A request comes in, that request like travels through your middleware, and you can read it, you can ask stuff about it, you don't modify it. Instead, what you do is you modify the response. You build up the response, you attach things to it, and then at the very end, you're going to send something back to the client, right? So that's when you call your res.send or your res.render, your res.redirect, something that causes the response to go out. So when we send parameters, we attach them to the request, right? So we should expect to find some method on the request that lets us read those. So I'm going to console log request and like redo the thing, and then spoiler alert, it's going to be like this huge thing that doesn't tell you anything. You're just going to see like this like brrr, with like all these like guts of the request object. It's a disaster. So if you need to find out how to do something on the request object, go look at the docs, Express docs. Normally I'm an advocate of just console this thing out and, use your brain and look at it. Tall order with the request object. It's very messy. So I'm just going to tell you it's going to be request.query, I think. Let's find out if I'm right. So let me refresh this. I wonder if that did it. Yeah, that did it. So when I refreshed the page, I got my query string params because they're already in the URL, right? That's the request I made. Now let's look at that request. When I want to see what I'm actually passing over to the server, in my network tab, when I select the relevant request, I'm going to click over to params, and that's going to tell me what I sent over. Yes, if you change the actual URL, it's going to change there. Exactly. So if I take this out of the URL, so now I just have /photos, I go to that route, flip back over to my server, now I get an empty object. Right? Cool. Now let's try this with a post request. Because I want to create a new thing, right? Not search for a thing. I want to create a new thing. So how does this form need to change? We're going to change this name, not because we have to, but because it makes like semantic sense, to title of my new post, and the color is just going to be the color, and maybe we should have a URL too, right? URL of the thing that we're about to send over. And if we don't give it this name, by the way, it doesn't appear in the parameters under any circumstances. It needs a name to get attached to anything to make it out of the form. You won't get any error or anything if you don't have a name in there, just your params won't show up. HTML is very laid back like that, sort of in an infuriating way. Okay, cool. So now we have new fish. It's going to be Clover. And URL is going to be fish.com/photos/1. Yeah. It still goes up here, right? So I said a post request doesn't put query string params in the URL, right? So that tells us that this is in fact a GET request. And we know that because forms default to GET request. So how do I change the method on a form? What attribute do I add? That was like deceptively easy. It's just method. When you want to tell it what method it is, you just say method equals get. You can do that. In this case, we want post. Post is going to be it can be all uppercase, it can be lowercase, whatever. For the HTML element, get and post are all it supports. There are other HTTP methods. Actually, you can make any method you want, but HTML forms only support get and post. But like if you are writing like your own, like if you have your own plan for submitting these requests, like you're using like Axios or Fetch or something like that, you know, you can like make your method fizz or whatever. But we're kind of just in like get post land. So we're just going to change that to post and see what happens. Oh, nothing, because I didn't restart the server. Can be orchid this time. Same photo. Oh no, an error. What happened? Cannot post photos. What does this mean? Yeah, you're not. Yeah, exactly. You're not allowed to post. Like another way to read this is that route doesn't exist, right? But wait, doesn't this route exist right here? No. Our server responds to this path, but path and route are different. What's the difference between a path and a route? Does anyone know? Path is where and route is how. Interesting. I want to say path is where and method is how. Route is a combination of where and how, right? So this is not a route. Slash photos is not a route. Get slash photos is a route. Okay? Which means that post slash photos is also a route. And importantly, they're different routes, right? So you're going to run into all sorts of problems if you like let those concepts like bleed into each other. Like, well, I already respond to slash posts. Like, what's going on? Yes, you may, but you don't actually. You need to make sure that the method also matches the route, right? So every time we go app.get, we're setting up get routes. What do you suppose we write if we want to respond to a post request? App.post. Great guess. Or did you know that already? Cool. And just to test that like our plumbing is working, we're just gonna res.send one of those. By the way, if I type something into the URL bar and hit enter, it's always going to be a get. So if you need to test your post endpoints, you need some other plan for that. You need to make a form, or you need to make a curl request, or use some app like Postman that lets you define your method. Because with your browser, it's always going to be get. So now we go new fish.com, search. Cool. But this is a post route, which means that we should be asking to change the server somehow, right? So I'm going to say we have, so what do I call this? Title? I'm going to call this name. Except here I call it name. I made up like a bunch of like fake data. And I'm going to have to add in the color because I did that in my form. So we have a bunch of fake data here, but this could be real data. And as long as the server is running, this variable is going to continue to be defined. Yeah, it's going to continue to be available to like anything in the scope, right? So what that means is as long as the server is running, we can like we can edit this array. And so in that way we can use it kind of as a database. You're going to learn more about how to like actually make calls out to a persistent database. The trade-off here is that, not really the trade-off, like the very obvious downside of this is that like once we leave the server, once we quit the process, that's gone, right? This is in volatile memory. But for now, we're just going to use this photos array as like as a thing that we can render stuff out of. That we can render stuff out of? Yeah, that's true. But also that we can add stuff to. So yeah, we want to get our data from this form. This form matches this schema. Does that make sense? So our form has an input that tells us what the name is, an input that tells us what the color is, input that tells us what the URL is. We have everything we need to build one of these objects on the server side. We just need the user to fill in the form. Click submit. So before we get to that, we need to figure out how to access our parameters, right? So in our post route, we're going to have, which thing are we going to look at to find the parameters? Which object that we get as a parameter? Request, yeah. And I think what we want is rec.body, but this isn't going to work because we need some middleware. So I'm not going to make you guess about this. This is just like a thing you have to know. We're going to tell like everything, every request that comes in is going to have to go through something called body parser. I think the way that we get that is app.use. Let's see if that works. It doesn't, so I'm going to go over to my other project where it does work. Because I don't know how this boilerplate thing works, like what version of Express we're on or anything. Yeah. I think the deal with older versions of Express is like you have to import body parser as its own library. I don't know which version our curriculum uses, but that'll just look like... Oh. You just require it up here, and then you put it in there. Actually, that wasn't such a pain. Let's just see if that works. Okay, I think those are just warnings. And then what we want to do is see if we console log the request body. We still don't get it. Okay, I'm going to go over to the other one where I know what's going on. Okay, so this one, much simpler. It's just a server.js file, and like that's it. That's this whole app. I actually did this one from scratch. I just like made a new repo, and I like made the package JSON like with my bare hands. I used capital A for my app because it's a constant. Constants use capital letters. I think it's baffling that we use lowercase letters by convention in Express. I'm gonna go yarn. Forget what my like go button is in this app. Oh yeah, I don't have one. Right. Okay. So this is another thing that I wanted to like. I don't have like npm run start or npm run dev or npm run go or anything. I just like run the server. And you can totally do that in your project too. Like if you know which file does all the imports and has the listen at the end, you can just run that file. Yeah, cool. So in this app, I was doing this thing where like I made a traffic light, and you can tell it to change colors. So do you want to like bring over our like fish code, or do you want to talk about the traffic light thing? What's that? This is okay? Okay, you want to talk about the traffic light? Okay. So this is a lot simpler. I have like all this like text. I just like created like a bunch of HTML elements out of strings. You're not gonna do this because this is ridiculous. But yeah, then all I do is like when I go to my home route, I like run this traffic light function, which generates my traffic light thing. The reason it's a function is because I need it to do this every time. I have like this variable light color. This is the only state that this app has, right? Is like this light color thing. The server is keeping track of what color the light is now. And then every time you render the home page, you need to like reevaluate what color the light is, right? So if the server thinks that the light is red, then the background for this element is red. If the server thinks it's yellow, the background is gold because yellow was too light. And then same thing for green. So if I didn't have this wrapped in a function, it would just evaluate once, and then it would stay the same. Like it would never change, right? So I want this function to like I want to run this function so it reconsiders each time what the value is. And then so I just take that traffic light thing and I concatenate it with my buttons, and each of my buttons is a form. And it's a form with, this is just some nonsense I was doing. I'm just going to get rid of that for now. Each of the buttons is just like a submit button and an instruction. So in this case, the method is post. So we know that we're making a change. We're asking the server to change its state, right? And the action is like, the action is the path, and you just have to kind of remember that those words mean the same thing, and they don't mean the other things that they might mean. I think that has to do with like conventional programming and web programming kind of being like different things for a long time. If it was like JavaScript developers that developed HTML, then they would have like named things the same thing, instead of having to make you remember like, oh, method means like two different things. And action is the same as path, but whatever. So in this case, I have this change endpoint, and I've parameterized the colors. Then down here, I have change and then the color that I want it to change to. Any questions about how my traffic light works? See some people thinking about it. So each of my buttons is going to be changed to red, changed to green, changed to whatever. Right? I'm going to get that color parameter out of my request params. I'm going to set the server's opinion about what color the light is right now to whatever's in this parameter. Yep. And then when I'm done, I'm going to send you back home. Right? So why don't I just, like, I can send back like this, right? I could just do that. And then you end up rendering the same thing. But I don't. I do a redirect instead. Why? So the light color is different as soon as this line runs. Right? So I'm ready to send over the new text like right here if I want. But I don't. Instead, I give the client an instruction. It's like, okay, I did the thing you asked me. Now go to this route instead. Make a GET request to this route instead. Why do I do that? Oh, otherwise the parameters, interesting. Otherwise the parameters change color. Yeah, so one consequence of that is that you would see, yeah, in the URL bar, like change red. Right? You'd see something like that, and you don't want that. That's true. Even if that weren't the case though, like we want to be careful about when we're sending post data back to the client. We're sending data in the post request back to the client because we don't want, like, we can send some data that says like, here's how this thing went. And then if we're using like asynchronous JavaScript so that it doesn't trigger a page refresh, then maybe we want to send back like a success message or a failure message or something like that so that our like React app can update some component, give you like a flash message or something. But we want to be careful with what we send back in the post request because the post, like in our bread actions, our post is like an edit, or it's an add, or it's a delete, right? It's not a read. So like if we start making decisions in the post route about what the client should see after, then we're kind of eating like the B and the R's lunch a little bit, and we don't want that. We want the B and the R to be responsible for browsing and reading. And that's important if like, you know, we change what this thing does. You know, we put like some new content in here or something. And then we have to remember to go update it over here. And that's kind of annoying. We also might have some special middleware that responds to like our GET requests or like does some like user auth stuff. Like this route might have other rules that this route is not aware of, and we don't want to have to maintain those in two places, right? So that's why a good pattern when you're working in this paradigm is after you do a post request, redirect to a route that represents what you want the user to see. Don't send the data back in the post request. So yeah, we have these buttons. Each one of these goes to. I'll show you in the dev tools what we're going to see here. Each button we click causes a post request. I'm going to make that a little bigger. Yeah, there we go. Each button we click causes a post request to the path /green. And you can see, like, I'm kind of annoyed with the way the dev tools do this because it just says green, but if you hover over it, the alt text says actually it's localhost 8080/change/green. So you have to hover over it to see the full path. Otherwise, you just see like the last thing. Kind of dumb. Okay, so we make a post request to /green. When we make that post request, it sets the light color to green. This stuff all updates. It's like now the green light is going to be green, and the other ones are going to be, they're not going to have a background color set, right? So they default to transparent. Or they default to inherit, actually. So their background color is going to be like whatever. Anyway. And then we do a redirect, so it reloads the home page. And that's kind of the basic round trip of updating state via post request. You'll notice that the way I did this, I could go change lavender. Oh, I can't get /lavender, right? I got burned by that thing I said earlier. But I could just as easily, let's say I had a form input thing, and I could do this on the front end, it just takes longer. Here's my lavender button. When I press lavender, it sets the server state to the server's opinion of the light color to lavender, and like just none of these respond to lavender, so you just get them all empty, right? But it's that idea here that because this is a dynamic route, that's how it's gonna behave. I could do some hedging here where I'm like, if rec params color I might read from like a whitelist of colors. So if my valid colors doesn't have the color that was passed, res.send send a 400 error and return. Like now when I click lavender, bad request. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, so now that you kind of know how to manipulate state that's persistent across requests, you can do this with anything, right? Like you have like an object or an array or something, and you can just mutate it. Inside your route handler, when you get those parameters, you can just manipulate whatever other state you have. You can make calls out to a database. You can send like a Twilio text to like your friend or yourself or something, your coworker, a delivery person. You can do all sorts of like anything you can do with normal programming, you can do inside of this route handler, like that. And the way that you get the parameters is through a form. Now, once you're kind of working in React land and stuff, your options open up a lot. Like you can just like create like a custom color picker if you want. Like you aren't tied to forms anymore because you can just build these requests out of whatever you want. But forms are still like a really elegant way to be able to capture user data and allow them to configure their experience and ask for specifically what they want. We're almost done. There's just one thing I want to talk about still. Yeah. Pre-configured responses to different status codes. So if I put 404 in there instead, it says color not found, or something like that. Gets lavender. Yeah, we get not found. And I'm actually not sure if that's Express deciding to say not found or if that's Firefox deciding to say not found. I wonder if... Yeah, so if I look at the response payload, I see not found in there, just the text, right? So it looks like probably Express deciding to do that. And in the boilerplate I had, like I was just like deleting stuff left and right. So we didn't really talk about what was in there, but it had like some custom code for like rendering my own 404 page. So like you can write middleware that says if the response is going to be 404, redirect them over here or show them this content. But yeah, I think if Express didn't handle 404s, you would just get like a blank page. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about here, which is this line and what it means for your form data. So in this case with my traffic light here, all of these just were driven by like the route, right? So I put the parameter in the route, and that works exactly the same as the get request, right? So when I go /change/lavender, the way that I'm telling the server what color I want is by putting it in the URL, right? And that works exactly the same way as it does with a GET request. But in a lot of cases, you're going to be capturing, like, if you're doing like a sign up form or something, you're going to be capturing a bunch of data. Users going to like type it. They're not going to type it into the URL. They're going to type it into the form, right? And I would be remiss if I left you hanging without like explaining how that stuff works. So I want to do this. We'll say that in addition to my 3 valid colors, I'm going to let a user like type in the color that they want and then get a cool error. Sounds like kind of a rude thing to do, but that's just going to be when we post to change. Submit. So I'm going to keep my submit button because I need some way to kick off the request, but I'm also going to put in text field. I'm gonna call it color because on the express side I want it to, like, I want to be able to go like rec dot whatever dot color, rec dot body dot color. It turns out. Yeah. Let's make sure that works. Now when we go lavender, so I'm actually gonna take out my code that causes that error to happen because I don't want an error to happen. Cannot post a change, right? Because I changed the URL scheme. So like this thing responds to change slash whatever. We don't have something that responds to slash change. So I'm gonna go app.post change. And I know I'm gonna res.redirect to home just like I was doing before. And here I just want to console log. This time the params don't go in the URL, they don't go into a query string, they go into the request body, right? So they get kind of like swallowed by the HTTP request, sent over by text. So if you have that like sensitive information, that like, you know, credit card number, password or whatever, that doesn't appear in your URL anymore. That goes in the request body. So I want to just make sure. My linter yells at me for console logs, which is why there's all this red here. Yeah. So let's clear this. Yeah. And then if I go back to my terminal where I'm expecting my console log, boom, we get color lavender, right? So that's the name of my form input. That's the data that I put into the form. See it again, goldenrod shows up here. And now any input element that you can put in a form, you can give it a name and you can access the value in your route handler. Thank you, nobody. So I want to show you how, like, just like your query string params you could look at in this params tab, you can do it with your form data here. But the trick is, they're hitching a ride to the backend in different places, right? So in the case of a GET request, it puts the query string params up in the URL, and you know, Firefox knows, oh, those are just params, and Express knows, oh, those are query string params. So in Express, when you want to get them, you have to go rec.query. If you want to get like this kind of thing where the parameterized part, the dynamic part, is part of the structure of the URL, you get that from rec params. And then if you get it from a form for a post request, that goes into the HTTP body, and you get them with the request body. Yeah, exactly. So rec.body.color. Let's just follow this through all the way. Make sure that we can see this here. Yeah, now we're just seeing chartreuse instead of like that whole params object. And then the last step to follow that through with is we actually perform the state change that we promised when we made this a post request, right? So a post request should always result in a state change unless there's like invalid data being passed, or like something invalid about the request, user isn't authorized or whatever. A post request implies that there's a state change. So if there's no state change, it shouldn't be a post. And now that that's done, we should see that same behavior where if I go like that, now the state actually changes, right? The server's opinion of what color the light was changes. And I should be able to go red. I get to turn red, so instead of using the buttons, green, any of my valid colors will result in the state change. So that's pretty cool. Any questions about that? Cool. I want to show you this gotcha, and I'm going to put it back in the notes. If you just like boot up an Express app and go rec.body to try to access your form data, you're going to get undefined. What's rec.body? That's because that doesn't work out of the box for some reason. It's something you have to configure. I think that's a baffling choice on behalf of like the Express team. That you just like wouldn't support post requests out of the box. I don't know why it's like that. Don't get me started. But to fix that, all we have to do is like Express comes with this middleware, doesn't enable it for you. You have to enable it yourself. So you have this middleware called URL encoded. You put it up at the top of your app, right? Because like in Express, everything like falls through the middleware until it finds something that handles it. URL encoded. You need to tell it that it's extended. That just means like an extended character set that is allowable in the data. I don't know why you have to do that. Like it seems nice to just like do. You always want extended true. So that should just be the default, but you have to put it in or you get deprecation warnings. And you pass that to app.use, right? Anytime you go app.use, it's like every time a request comes in, if that request hasn't been handled by the time you hit me, run it through this function. So app.use, express URL encoded, extended true. This allows rec.body to be read. When you're doing when you're sending JSON back and forth, instead of like URL encoded form parameters, you have to add a middleware for JSON too, like that. And you kind of just got to know that. Sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in these notes that I've been like neglecting because it's so important. Yeah, all this stuff is in the Express docs. And as soon as you go like, why can't I read my request body? It'll come up. But if you don't know to expect that, like if you just go rec.body and see undefined, the thing that should go through your head is, oh, that's not a thing, right? Well, it is a thing, you just have to configure it. So if you don't know to expect that there, then you just think like, oh, well, I guess I'm not on the right track. I guess I need to like call rec.something else. But no, it is rec.body. Trust yourself. You just need to make sure that middleware makes the request body available to you in that way. That's the big gotcha. So before we wrap up, that's nice. Before we wrap up, I just want to like underscore again that like when you're looking for the data that comes through on the request, there are a couple places that you can look for it, right? It's going to be rec. I want to see if y'all remember. What are the three places that we can look for data from the client? Rec.params, rec.body, rec. Query, yeah, good. And each of these are for rec params is like when you have something like photos ID. ID is a param. Rec.body is like form data from post requests. Rec.query is form data from get requests. And those map to the things in your query string params. Cool. Now go out there and conquer some bread. Thank you.